Dr. Imran Khalid is a PhD in Environmental and Natural Resources Policy from the State University of New York. He's a prominent research fellow at the Sustainable Development Policy Institute, SDPI, in Islamabad. As an environmental scientist, he heads the water governance component of the Pathways to Resilience in Semi-Arid Economies project, the PREES project in Pakistan. His profound experience in water governance and climate change issues in Pakistan and his goal to avert the environmental crisis here makes him a valuable source of knowledge for today's topic. So handing over to you, Imran, take it away.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here and to share the platform with such esteemed colleagues and experts. I did have a presentation, but apparently there's some technical difficulties. So it's Murphy's Law. You know, if anything is going to go wrong, it's going to go wrong. But it's fine. What I'll try and do is to open up my PowerPoint and go through it. And I'm so happy to be following Dr. Khan and Dr. Sultana, because they've essentially laid down a very good path to what I wanted to say. So I'm building up on what they're saying. It's actually a lot of what I'm going to say is going to be linked with their comments. So essentially, I title my talk, Grasping at the Dying Spring, Plastic Bags, Tsunami, and a Corridor. So just a brief bit of background, what I'm trying to do here. So I'm picking up on what Rachel Carson wrote when she wrote her famous book now, The Silent Spring, and that's where we are right now. And this is a quote directly from her book, and I think it resonates right now as we talk about climate change and environmental degradation. A grim specter has crept upon us almost unnoticed, and this imagined tragedy may easily become a stark reality we all shall know. If she were here right now, you know, she'd say that this is easily relatable to the climate crisis that we have, and we're already finding this out. If you're in Bangladesh, if you're in Pakistan, if you're in India, Philippines, small island states, you're already feeling new normal take hold. You're also feeling it in Australia when it comes to the heat waves. You're feeling it in the US when it comes to the hurricanes. So the new normal is already here. It's affecting us in a very significant manner. So climate change isn't something that's going to happen in the future. We're already experiencing it. The Pathways to Resilience in Semi-Arid Economies project that Mira just mentioned ran from 2014 to 2018, in which it was an IDRC and DFID funded project that looked at the impacts of climate change on migration in Pakistan, the Cotton Valley chain, as well as water governance. And it took the hotspots approach, whereby it looked at the areas that were most affected by climate change and highlighted a few study locales and districts. And we did studies and looked at them from the point of view of looking at it in terms of the climate crisis and how that can be understood. In particular, we looked at flood governance system in Pakistan. So our research questions essentially focused on the political economy considerations, equity and justice concerns, as well as insights from the past flood events, whether they've been taken into account. Because flooding has historically been a regular component of the landscape of South Asia. But what you're seeing right now is that due to development and due to our focus on development in terms of the structural issues vis-a-vis building of dams and barrages and not letting the rivers flow as they used to, and with the population growth, we're seeing more and more exacerbation of these flood events, whereby they're affecting livelihoods and communities. So we focused on two districts here, Dera Ghazi Khan and Chang. Chang is essentially at the confluence of Jhelum and Chenab rivers, while Dera Ghazi Khan is on the Indus River. And all of them combine at a later point before going into the Sindh province. But they regularly face these flood events. And I just wanted to highlight that a lot of the areas that are flooded in Pakistan are flooded in areas that have come to be known as canal colonies. These colonies were settled by the British by bringing in individuals from other parts of India, and they brought them here into these parts because they thought that they could take the canals out of the rivers and basically start an agricultural revolution whereby the irrigation was happening in areas that did not either receive the regular rain as in other parts of the country, and they did not have access directly to riverine flows. So that's also to be kept in mind as to this whole experiment, the social experiment that came to be known as canal colonies, has taken on a life of its own, and it has a great amount of repercussions when it comes to environmental degradation and climate change. We did focus group discussions. We had key informant interviews in the capital city as well as the provincial capitals, and we also did talk to businesses and did surveys as part of our methodology. Essentially, what I wanted to highlight here was that since our focus is essentially on developing structures and building dams and barrages, our response to flood and a response to managing that risk is also structured. So we have barrage. We have what are known as bunds here. These are dikes or embankments that have been set up right alongside urban areas as well as some rural areas. And what they do is they keep the floodwaters within a particular area. So there's an embankment right next to Jhang city, for example, that is breached every time there's a risk of floods. Now, that embankment is to protect two particular entities. One is the Trimu barrage, which is essentially an avenue for diverting waters. It's a structure, and Jhang city. So what happens is when the flooding happens and the floodwaters rise, they break up that embankment at one particular location and allow the waters to recede on one side. One would think that that particular side would be, there would be no people living there, and it would protect the city as well as this particular engineering marvel, the barrage. But that's not the case. What happens is when the waters are let go on one side, they affect villages and communities for miles on end and result in great amount of damage. So essentially what we've done is we've decided and protecting one part, one infrastructural component. By doing that, it's okay for us to put some communities and individuals at risk. So that's how we are responding to this, and that causes a significant amount of damage and places a lot of lives at risk on one side. We've been doing that for many decades, but the question now becomes that with the climate change taking hold, and what we're seeing is that there are more and more flood events happening, can we continue on the same path whereby there's a breaching of the embankment every time floodwaters rise? And I wanted to highlight here that the breaching is done by committee. And who's a part of that committee? There's the executive engineer of the barrage. He looks at the headworks, and as well as the embankment. He's the convener. He is joined by district coordination officer, not below the rank of BS 18. There's a representative of the army, not below the rank of lieutenant colonel, and there is a representative again from the highway department. That's it. There are these four individuals who decide when the embankments, when they're going to, because what happens is the army comes in, they put in some explosives and they blow it up. We don't have anybody from the community there, male or female. We don't have any representative from the local NGO, local community-based organization. And it's always been done that way. So the question then becomes that if we are to be resilient, are we going to continue to leave people out and make decisions in that manner? So what's happening here is that there are livelihoods that are at risk, there are communities that are at risk, but they don't have a say in terms of policy making and decision making. At the same time, there is a lot of unplanned development happening in these areas for various reasons, and that also exacerbates the impact of flood events. There are political dimensions, there are winners and there are losers. If you are well off, if you have approach to, if you have connections with somebody in the government, then perhaps you can protect your lands by having that breaching section moved. So I talked to a deputy commissioner who used to work in these parts, and what he told me was that depending on the strength of one political party or another, the breaching sections can be changed. And if that is happening, then that can have an impact on our response. And that's very important as well. Moving on to how this is affecting gender. Our policies are definitely lacking when it comes to gender. Women play a minimal role in decision making and responding to extreme events. As I said, they're not part of this breaching committee. Even any other member of the civil society is not a part of the decision making apparatus. In these areas, women play a very important role in agriculture. They work behind the scenes when it comes to small businesses, if not in front. But they're not taking into account their presence when we're making these decisions. Our early warning systems do not cater to the elderly. They do not cater to the women. Early warning systems, whether it is through an announcement at a mosque where women do not go, that needs to be highlighted. Women who are not able to go outside in public, they'll be affected as well. Governmental plans for post-disaster relief do not take gender issues into account. So when we went to these areas, we found that if there were floodwaters coming, we were told that people did not want to move out to these camps, these relief camps that are usually set up on railway lines because that's higher ground, because there is lack of clean drinking water. There is lack of sanitation facilities. And if you are a girl child, a woman, then it's a lot more difficult for you to access these facilities as opposed to if you were a man. If you were a man, and in this context, families told us that they'd rather wait out the floods and hope that it doesn't exacerbate to the extent that the government is telling them, because on the other side, they have no other avenues when it comes to feeling protected if they do venture out of their homes. There are concerns with the privacy as well, and all of these enhance the risks when it comes to individuals. I've been told that when it comes to the relief efforts, the rescue efforts, a lot of times the policemen come out there and they're supposed to help the communities, but a lot of times they can't swim. They're not equipped properly, and they tend to become a burden on the communities themselves, whereby now the communities are not only looking for their own, the people who are affected, but also these individuals who have not been trained properly in terms of responding to some of these. So these are some of the areas that need to be highlighted. When it comes to floods, the issue is mainly displacement. It's not migration as such, because flood events are temporary. Individuals move out and then they come back in. But this does play a havoc with local system. Where does Pakistan stand? Where are we heading in the right place? So we've had a number of climate change initiatives. There's a climate change policy from 2012, a climate change framework, which goes into great detail about what needs to be done now through 2030. That came about in 2014. There's a water policy of 2018. A climate change authority was mandated. It's not been operationalized yet. We've had a nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement out now. We're working towards a sustainable development goal, which address some of these issues. So what's happening is, so we've got all these policies, but there is a gap in terms of implementing them, right? So our environmental policies go even further out to the 1970s. That's when we first started to think about these issues. We've had flood protection plans. There have been 4 of them, and the latest one is very holistic in nature. But when it comes to on-ground realities, there's a deep disconnect, and that's what we should work towards. So, what does all of this have to do with plastic bags? I talked tsunami and a corridor. Why do I have that in the title of my presentation? I did that because over the past 5 years, you've got these 3 things. When I think about what's happening in Pakistan vis-a-vis climate change and what's out there in the news, it's the plastic bags. There have been plastic bans across the world, and so Pakistani Ministry of Climate Change also picked up on that, and they focused on it, and they tried to implement a plastic ban. And it did not work out as planned. People are still using it. There were some fights on this with the businesses. Government sent out these individuals to stop the shops from giving out these plastic bags. But I'm highlighting the plastic bag issue here because for one reason or another, the plastic bags were picked up as something to talk about, to something put forward, while the risks that we are talking about vis-a-vis climate change or environmental degradation in general are a lot more significant. But plastic bags it was, and it remains. I mean, that's an issue that resonates not only with governmental officials, but also with the public. I think climate change is somewhat esoteric when it comes to it. The second part is the tsunami. The tsunami is the billion-tree tsunami that started in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, and then it turned into the 10 billion tree tsunami across the country, where Pakistani government has started on a plan to plant trees. Now, this is also a reflection of our understanding of how things are. So when we talk about environment and climate change, planting trees does resonate with people. Although there are new studies out that show that perhaps planting trees at such a large scale is very difficult, and how do you do it without getting into monoculture and ensuring that works. But by and large, that's been a success. I think when it comes to global mitigation, Pakistan has played a role in this. And then finally, the corridor. Dr. Khan talked about it. She hinted at it. She didn't name it, but that's what it is. It's the China-Pakistan economic corridor that has brought about a great deal of development in Pakistan over the past 4 or 5 years. That includes roads and highways, as well as coal power plants. Coal power plants in Saiwal, coal power plants in Thar. And as a country that is one of the most affected countries when it comes to the effects of climate change, why is it that we're focusing on coal power plants? Why is it that we're focusing on CPEC? And that's become more of a security issue. And anybody who talks against the CPEC, who goes against coal power plants, is thought to be against the country, for lack of a better phrase. So this is where we stand. You have a number of competing issues that are happening, and whether we are heading in the right direction, we'll have to take into account the communities on the ground, as well as our past experience. So Dr. Khan and Dr. Sultana have really laid it out for you. But I'll end with this quote from Burton et al. In their book. It's called "Environment as a Hazard," and it's about a forgotten disaster. This is a forgotten disaster from 1970. It was at that time East Pakistan. It was Bhola, right before Bangladesh became independent. 225,000 people died, hundreds of thousands of cattle, millions and millions of dollars worth of crop damage. And it because of our response, with the government being in the West and then this happening in the East, I think that also contributed to what transpired in 71. But this is what Burton has to say, and I'll end here. In 1970, many died who need not have because of failure at governmental levels to weigh the full consequences of technological change on the indigenous systems of livelihood. Public works requested in Karachi, designed in Holland, and financed in Washington provided means to stabilize the shifting islands of the Delta and to keep out high tides and destructive salts. In so doing, they provided encouragement for settlement. What they did not provide was protection from cyclones or plans for evacuation. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Imran. Thank you so much.